Hello, everybody's note taker as well seems to be coming to this as per usual.
It makes our attendance numbers look fantastic though, right? Double the
Yeah, it
numbers.
does. It does. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's one day the note takers will take over and just start talking to themselves, and we won't have to do any of these. So
Right.
awesome. So lots of people again registered for this one, which is tremendous. Lots of interest in provisioning. But welcome today for everyone, regardless of where you are all around the world. Hopefully, it's not too early or not too late for some of you folks. Today, David, we're going to be talking about SharePoint Teams, Viva Engage, provisioning in Microsoft 365, stopping the chaos and starting the control. And for those of you who don't know, Orchestry started as a provisioning tool for a while. We saw
Right.
this really early on, the carnage that was caused by provisioning and people creating stuff and teams. That was 5 years ago. Hasn't gotten any better. In fact, I think for a lot of companies, it's probably gotten worse in terms of people creating stuff because there's more things you can create now. So many things that you can create everywhere, like loops, Copilot pages. I still don't know what those are or what they're doing or where they're supposed to go, but lots and lots of good stuff. All right, well, why don't we get started here? So my name is Michael Pisarik. I'm one of the founders and CEO here at Orchestry. Again, thank you so much for joining this webinar. As we always say, if you haven't been to an Orchestry webinar before, we try to make these as interactive as possible. If you have any questions, please use the chat. But as always, we like to start off with a bit of an icebreaker. So where is everyone joining us from today? If you can maybe, if you want to, share your location in the chat. It's always interesting to see how many people we have from all around the world. I am in Vancouver, Canada, originally Australian, because Dave's Canadian accent is much more Canadian than I am. Oh, but lots of people here: Dallas, Texas, Calgary,
Oh,
Waterloo,
Montreal's.
Maine, Burnaby. Yeah, Sherman, you're very, very far. A couple of people from Montreal, all the way in London. Jake, you're leading the furthest away here. So awesome. But welcome, everyone. And David, hello.
Oslo. Wow. Yeah, lots of great places here. It makes a great checklist of places we got to visit, right? So I'm David. I've been the director of product here at Orchestry for a few years and been in the M365 space for a long time. I've done a lot of webinars and I've done many of them with Michael. So we tend to be a pretty good dynamic duo here going through some really interesting topics. So today, as Michael alluded to, we're going to talk about provisioning, and the goal today is to spend the majority of this session in a live demo. I think that that's usually the most interesting as a participant. I think we prefer that ourselves. Slides are good. We'll give you a few of those, a little bit of a taster and some takeaway, because you can always use these slides internally. And then we'll spend the majority of the time walking through how a solution can address some of the problems that we'll lay out. So what we're going to talk about today is, it's pretty straightforward as far as the deck goes. We have just one or two, icebreakers here around why provisioning is even a topic still worthy of conversation in 2025, 6, right? And Michael already alluded to some of the reasons. So we'll just briefly talk about that. We'll talk about out-of-the-box tools. There's several options here. Much like with anything in Microsoft, there's many ways, many pathways. And then we're going to talk about how we tackle this. And then hopefully by the time you get here, you kind of see some of the logic behind why we've done things a certain way, right, Michael, around metadata and approvals and all these sorts of things, right?
Yeah, all of these sorts of things where it's either not available out of the box in Microsoft 365, or it's very, very difficult to build. And I think sprawl has always been a challenge and an issue. And of course, that's to do with provisioning. I think it's become much more of a challenge and an issue now in the world of Copilot and AI, where people are trying to make sure that their content is correct and timely and accurate. That whole thing of just letting people create whatever they want, wherever they want, and hoping for the best doesn't necessarily work. And I think what we've found, at least with our customers, and I'll be interested to see what people think, is that you need to have the process from the very beginning. This idea of letting
Hmm.
people create stuff and then chasing them, like a month or a week after, just with the way that organizations move, it's a little bit too difficult. And Most of the Microsoft tools are more chasing, right? It's more of a let's kind of deal with it once it's essentially happened. But I think one of the big challenges with provisioning is really getting it right out of the box, whether it's correct templates, correct metadata, security, retention labels, sensitivity labels, all of that sort of stuff. So we're going to cover all of that today.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go quickly through this because I think you're only likely here if you believe that provisioning matters. I believe that's probably almost everyone here. But I mean, just some numbers that we've shared in the past around the manual time consumption, the processes that often are implemented to try to combat things, like Michael said, often after the fact, which compounds the manual effort. You have to fix something and then put something new in place. There's this thing that I think that doesn't get talked about as much is like what is the impact to the end users, right? Because that's the largest population of people always, right? They're the people that are trying to request workspaces. And often we feel that a lot of the solutions do a disservice to the end users and they end up feeling frustrated, which leads to the rise in risk of things like them going around the process, shadow IT, and all sorts of other things, right? So there's lots of reasons why this is important. We've even talked to many companies. I know as a consultant, I'd worked with a lot of companies that we would do some kind of pulse checks around how they're using SharePoint, and we get tons of negative feedback from users saying, we can't stand SharePoint. And we'd always try to drill into that. And so often it was because every single site that they were on was completely different from the other one. And they thought that that was really a SharePoint problem when in fact really it's a consistency and a governance problem, right? And it can be solved. But this can be quite taxing for users, right? Because they feel like, you guys know this probably, the way the degree to which you can customize SharePoint now, you can create almost completely different feeling environments. So if you have one project that's run one way and another way, another way, becomes very mentally exhausting for the users and the people in that project.
Yeah,
So
and it
that's a
gets
problem.
even yeah, and it gets even worse, Dave. I mean, even on something as simple as projects. We always use projects as an example because every company does projects. We see so many times in organizations, hey, I'm doing a bunch of projects. I'm in three different projects. They're completely different.
Right.
Two of them are teams. One of them is a SharePoint site. God only knows why. Both of the teams are different. The channels are different there. The SharePoint structure is completely different also. And it becomes really, really difficult as well. And the problem has grown over time. I mean, for the second point
Mm.
here around the what to use when question, that becomes a huge struggle for users. And I think this kind of idea around a user's going to go in and they're going to have the technical expertise to understand the subtle intricacies between using a loop page or a OneNote page or a Copilot page or a SharePoint page for creating some sort of project documentation. There's just so much nuance to that. And I think, again, we assume that our users are experts and they're just not. And again, as Microsoft has introduced more capabilities into the platform, it becomes more difficult. So something as simple as, hey, we have a project and we want to keep information about that project that's not in a difficult. I mean, there's like 20 different ways, right, to do that in Microsoft 365. Are we going to use OneNote? Are we going to use a loop page? Are we going to use one of these Copilot pages? Are we going to use a SharePoint page, Dave? Maybe we want to use a list, for instance. There's just so much nuance to that. And again, there's just way too much cognitive load for users to be able to understand this. And you're never going to train them, right, to that level of understanding what to use when. And again, like Dave said, that leads to a lot of issues and a lot of concerns from an adoption perspective also.
Yeah. So that underlines just some of the elements that we hear from people around some of the side effects of poor provisioning. So let's move on now to what are some of the kind of options out there? What is the spectrum that exists there of kind of very, very low complexity to higher complexity when we look at how would we apply governance to something like provisioning just using SharePoint and Microsoft 365 out of the box? And there's many ways and many spectrums, and you could do this in 3 steps or 5 or 10. We decided to kind of boil it down to 5 of the most common steps or kind of approaches that we see with provisioning. The first one is totally free, total freedom, right? Anyone can create anything. That means any team, any SharePoint site, maximum freedom, maximum speed, but lots of duplication, sprawl, inconsistency, and then you get this unhappiness from people that are really confused, right? Then you often have companies that move from that to something called like a degree of limited freedom, where they say, well, we're going to train a bunch of power users, for example, and we're only going to let the power users request SharePoint sites and teams. So this helps cut down the chaos, but now you have this kind of gatekeeper situation here where only certain people can create it. And at the end of the day, you don't necessarily even have a way to enforce consistency within those gatekeepers, right? They could still be doing things completely differently. They're human beings, right? Another step tends to be looking at the out-of-the-box templating that's available in Teams or in SharePoint to set up organizational templates, right? These are good. They're a good step forward because they create that consistency, but they don't necessarily address the problem of, overcreation or people choosing the right thing, to Michael's point about what to use when. And there's other problems that I'll show you technically when we show you an example of this around you can't even force users to select an organizational template, even if you have them, right? So that's a big governance hole right there.
Yeah, and even with those site templates, I mean, it's really around the structure. It's not around the information. So things like naming, for instance, right? That's not really governed through there. Making sure there's at least two owners, making sure there's some members, maybe making sure there's some security practices in terms of sharing. I mean, you can enforce that with the sensitivity label. But those site templates that Microsoft has, much, much better story than it used to be a couple of years ago, Dave, where
Very
really
true.
there wasn't
Yeah.
any story there. But yeah, they're quite limited. It's really more around structures and creating your own custom ones as well. You're probably going to have to get into some code there, some JSON around what are they called, site designs and those site template pieces as well.
Yeah, definitely. You still need PowerShell on the SharePoint side. On the team side, it's easier, but at the end of the day, it has its own problems. We then see a lot of companies, especially that once companies get into the medium to larger size, Michael, we often see them have some kind of request process. Sometimes it's just a ticket, right, through like ServiceNow or something like that. Other times it's like a dedicated intake form for someone to request a site. And then the difference between these last two really is whether the process of implementing those sites is then done manually or if it's done in some kind of automated fashion, right? And so we sometimes see a gradual move towards the right here to automate when you see processes are kind of fairly consistent over time. You look for automation opportunities. And this is a great step forward, but it does mean a lot of maintenance at times. And we'll talk through why that is in a few slides here. So let's inject a little bit of levity for a moment, and we'll take the opportunity to showcase some ChatGPT image creation here and turn this into something maybe a little bit more memorable than the previous slide. So let's look at how these kind of operate. If we were to look at these from a caricature type lens, we have that total freedom, which is basically like the Wild West, right? And ChatGPT actually did a pretty comical explanation here, which is accurate. Everyone can grab a plot of land and throw up a shack. The streets are buzzing, but before long, the town is littered with half-built saloons, stables, and abandoned mines, right? And that is very true. It's sites that are abandoned, right, Michael? It's things that
Yep.
no one ever used. It's duplicates. There's 5 sites for the same project. I mean, it's quite accurate.
It
Really.
is. This is, by the way, probably the best use of AI I've seen so far, both from the image and from the description perspective also. But yeah, this kind of Wild West happens pretty quick. And I think the amount of customers that we see that have this Wild West problem is extremely high. Now, of course we're a little bit biased because the cohort that comes to us seeks that out. But we see that a lot. And in larger organizations, we see that a ton. And it can get really concerning for people. I mean, we've seen customers as well who have 1,000 users and 25,000 Teams and
Yes,
SharePoint sites,
right.
right? Because
We
people
have.
are just creating stuff. And within those 25,000, at least 500 to 1,000 of them have test in the name because people are just going in and creating a bunch of stuff. And that's just on the creation side, let alone on, the other governance side of what happens once, this stuff stops being used and everything else. So again, I think by default, Microsoft makes this very, very open. And I know, Dave, we get asked the question all the time, well, why doesn't Microsoft have tools to lock it down? Microsoft is in the business of helping you to get your content into their cloud with the least amount of friction as they possibly can. So, that's the issue, this kind of balance of how do we make sure that our users are doing the right thing, but also making sure that, we can respond to businesses. Really, Microsoft leans to the way of, well, let's make it as easy as possible as well.
Right. So then if we take our metaphor, we continue this journey here. So now we talked about that limited freedom where only a few people have the ability to create things. And that's kind of like a deputized town where you have sheriff and their deputies. They can do these things, bring some order, but we have a bottleneck issue usually happening pretty quickly here, right? As we can see, all these poor folks waiting at the gate here outside, very despondent. And then we move into site templates, right? Where we can kind of start to create a little bit more order. Maybe we have a bit of a suburbia growing that's very cookie cutter. Everything looks the same, but there's no zoning board. I actually think that's a pretty good metaphor, right? There's no HOA. There's nothing keeping these things in alignment with an overarching principle or goal, unfortunately. Then we get to kind of that request system, right? We introduce a request. This is kind of like a bureaucratic city hall where you go with an application like this poor guy here sweating with his application and getting in a long line. And it's a funny, comical way to look at it, but it has some truth to it, right? Sometimes there are delays here. People might wait a few days before actually getting a request approved, and they feel frustrated. And the risk is, what are they going to do in that time while they're waiting, right? And then you might think that you've done the absolute best you can. You've got a request system and you've got everything automated, but you also end up potentially over-architecting something to the degree that you create a gridlock around the maintenance of that solution. We call that technical debt, right, in the product space, right? It ends up being so heavy that the whole machine is kind of groaning under its own weight here. So that's kind of just a really quick way to kind of inject a fun little interpretation of how those can kind of play out in a kind of fictional scenario.
And before we go on, round of applause, please, everyone, for David Francoeur's prompting here, because this is actually very, very well done with ChatGPT. Any prompt questions, feel free to send them over to Dave as well, because we would never be able to do this manually as well through here. Just the prompt question, just put them in the chat if we can here. But this is tremendous work from ChatGPT and yourself, Dave. Tremendous.
Maybe I'll share later comically all the failures that also happened before I got to this point, because there were a few. Yeah. So let's just look a little bit more closely at these 5 different steps, and then I promise we'll move into the demo. So the Wild West, every user can create anything. Great for adoption, but it creates this huge risk of sprawl. And you give people an interface like this. People, like Michael said, they don't necessarily know all the answers to all the things they're being asked. They don't necessarily even know what a sensitivity label is. They might not know what to choose here. They might not even need a team, right? But they just happen to find their way into Teams and they click new, right? So you have a lot of risk here.
And they might not even know that you can't call the first channel general.
Oh yeah, I love that.
That annoys the hell out of people.
I love that. Yeah,
we've seen that as well.
Definitely love that. So that is the case with Open. Now, if you want to lock it down, Microsoft gives you some steps. It's not super friendly. You got to run a PowerShell script. Basically, you tell Microsoft, okay, there's a subset of users that are allowed to create, and everybody outside that group is not allowed, right? So you have to do this in a few places, and it does help with that sprawl, but then you have a few people that are gatekeeping, right? And then there's still not necessarily any consistency achieved at the end of the day.
Yeah, we don't see many people doing this deputized town approach. I actually think it's a pretty good approach, because what you can then do is structure training around that as well. That we say, listen, you can't start creating stuff until you go through some training, and then at least give some training around what to use when, basic stuff around naming, maybe some basic governance rules there. But again, as we've seen, you're still relying on humans for now before AI takes over. But the problem is you still get 500 teams and SharePoint sites with test in the name, and you still get the situation where Dave and I are working on a project together. Dave creates a project team and forgets to invite me. I'm like, well, obviously a team hasn't been created. I go and create one. Now we have two. We use that for a week, and now we have to merge them together, and that becomes a nightmare here. But again, this is an option for you as well. If you are, if you want to kind of stop that bleeding out of the box, this idea of only giving a subset of people the ability to create groups works really well. And it's a group creation mechanism as well. I'm not sure, Dave, I don't think you can get more granular than that out of the box. But if they can create groups, they can create Outlook groups, teams,
Yeah.
SharePoint sites, all of that sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah, there is an additional control that you can apply for SharePoint, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is an option where, yeah, just you're trying to reduce the amount of people that can do this. And then we can add templates. And to be clear, these are not mutually exclusive. You could have total freedom, or you could have the deputized town and also use site templates, right? These can work, these steps can overlap, right? The previous two, for example. Once you get into this, though, there are challenges, and I think I've seen a lot of frustration from a lot of users in kind of the social media forums with Microsoft, right, around like, why give us the ability to create organizational templates, but then make it so difficult for the users to actually find them, right?
Yeah.
So like, I actually have to know from the screen in the back here to get to the templates and teams, I have to know that I have to click this link. And then
this UX, I don't know who came up with this. This is awful. No one sees this link at all.
No one's gonna see this. You're gonna have to do a lot of training to make sure they see that. And then they come here, and then there's an additional problem. So here's my custom Orchestry template. But look at all the rest of the stuff, this junk in here. And I can't even remove those. Those are the Microsoft templates. I can't remove them. And guess what else I can't remove, Michael? From scratch. I cannot remove that.
Oh.
So
I think you might be able to remove those teams templates now. Maybe not.
I tried last night and I could not.
Couldn't do it. But then you
maybe with PowerShell you can.
Maybe with PowerShell, yeah. And there's a lot of weird ones as well. Like if you're working at a consulting organization, the ability for you to create a hospital team
bank branch
seems odd, or of bank branches as well.
Yeah. Right. So to me, that's the biggest single pitfall of this solution is you can spend a lot of time creating the templates, but the same thing is true in SharePoint. I'll show you guys later. You have to click through several screens to get to the templates in SharePoint, and there's nothing you can really do about that. So then we move into some kind of automation, and this is just one quick shout out. This is from Greg, the SharePoint Maven, who's a great resource if you don't know of him. He has a great site called Lookbook 365, and I sniped this screenshot of a request form because it's a good one. It's one of the better ones I've seen, actually. You can create a list form in Microsoft, right, very easily in a SharePoint list in a form and get people to fill out a request. And then maybe you have a Power Automate flow that goes and gets an approval, and then it goes and gets created, right? So this is something that can help. You can do things like capture the meaning, capture the purpose, capture the people that should have access. And then the nice thing is that you now have a layer of people that can interpret this and then hopefully create the right thing that's fit for purpose. So do I create a team, or do I create a team site, or do I create a communication site, or is it a Viva Engage workspace? Hopefully you're routing this now to an approver that can have some agency in that mapping, and that can help. But I guess what you give up then is, agility, right? This really can slow things down a lot, especially if these people are then being asked to go manually create these objects.
Yeah. I think this looks like a Microsoft form. What is it? It's not a Power App, right? I think it looks like
it's a Microsoft form that it's just been formatted. Yeah.
Formatted nicely. Yep.
Yeah. So you can make it okay through this process. And then if you want to go to that kind of final out of the box step, you're really looking at P&P provisioning, which is a whole library that is a community source project where you can essentially define at a very granular level what is included in your SharePoint templates and package that up, and it gets packaged in an XML file, and then you can use PowerShell to provision these over and over again. So this can be great for that consistency, right? So every time you have a project, you run a PowerShell script to say, create Janet's new project, and it will use this XML definition, and that can be really good. But I'll be really honest. I know that, in a past life as a consultant, we would create a lot of templates for people. We would do a lot of templating for customers, and often it was a good start. But the challenge we would find is that sometimes as soon as, 2 or 3 months after you put all that effort into defining a template, you already had feedback from users about things that they wanted to change. And that's natural, right? Like, what is a project template for your organization is probably not a static thing. It's constantly evolving, right? What tools you're going to use, what processes you use, what security it requires is constantly a moving target. So now you're saying that to keep these aligned with our business processes, we have to constantly manipulate code, right? And this is a very technical exercise. I'll be honest, like it's a technical exercise, requires testing, and it really can create a significant amount of technical debt where you have 5, 6, 10 of these, and you're spending, your entire day just updating these files based on feedback from users, which can be very time consuming. So what can we do about this, right? And now we can switch gears a little bit out of the PowerPoint deck and talk about how there are other approaches that exist and things like Orchestry, where we have very deep template configuration, but we don't do that at the expense of the end user. We try not to do that at the expense of the end user. We want to balance the needs of the administrators with the end user experience. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing this and switch over to
What about
my
our poll,
browser.
Dave? Are we doing the poll?
Oh yeah, good question. I forgot about the poll. Before we jump in, let's do a quick poll. I have one queued up and forgot to launch it. So if you guys want to, now that we've gone through these 5 options, let us know what your organization is doing right now. Just out of curiosity, we have about 60 people here. Let us know what you are currently doing. Do you see the poll, Michael?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
I have even answered the poll. Let's see what's going to win here.
All right, we're getting some answers trickling in here.
I think
Interesting.
everyone can see the results here. Okay.
Okay, we'll just give people another minute or two. So
it's a very, very low usage of those out-of-the-box site templates, and then no one's using limited free. So
no one does. Yeah, interesting. So request and manual IT is actually, significant leader here, which is quite interesting.
So people just maybe in the chat. So manual IT means a request comes in and someone from IT is manually creating these things. Is that what folks are doing? Like a human being is going in basically and doing that. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Wow, interesting.
Wow. Okay. We can definitely help you with that, but wow. Okay.
Okay.
Well, there's a lot of people doing that. Okay. There we go.
Okay.
That's fascinating.
Okay. Let us switch over. Thanks for mentioning that. I would have totally forgot. So that's great to see. And so there's some options out there. So I'm going to share. Give me the thumbs up, Michael, if you can see my browser. I'm in Teams right now. Great.
You are good.
All right. So we're going to tag team this. We're going to walk through some of the features, why they're there, and then we're going to kind of walk you through how this then gets presented to the end user, because I think that's really important to us.
Yeah.
So let's start from the bottom here. That's what I like to do. So when we think about what makes up a really good template, whether it's a Teams template or a SharePoint template or a Viva Engage template, we want to think about what are the elements that make that thing a template, right?
And by the way, before we begin, for people that don't know, this is Orchestry. So this is not native out of the box Microsoft 365. This is Orchestry, how this all works. Do we want to show them, Dave, quickly out of the box how you can do this? I think people know.
Sure.
Right?
People, I think people know, but like,
yeah, people know.
Just to show you that SharePoint example, like first of all, the user has to find their path to SharePoint. They then have to know to click here. And then, to be honest, it looks like I have 2 choices here. Where are the templates? They're nowhere to be seen. You have to know to click further, and then you have to know to click the from your organization, right? And this is all just a lot of clicks. It's a lot of reliance on an end user to go down the right path here. And just, from personal experience, that doesn't work, right? So out of the box, that doesn't work well. I even tried asking Copilot earlier. I lost the thread, but I asked it to help me create something, and it said it could not help me.
Do it,
So
do it, do it, do it, do it live, please.
do it live. Okay, so I think what I asked was, hey, I need help uh, creating a project for a new project called Project Gemini. That includes a number of internal collaborators. So I think the first thing it did is it tried to walk me through creating a project plan. Yeah, so here you go. So first it's telling me, not useless. It's telling me, what are the milestones? What are the deliverables? What do you want to do? And I was like, so then I tried to kind of re-steer it and say, no, I don't need this. I just need a space to do
What if
this
you say,
work.
what about I just need a SharePoint site?
Okay.
I'm hoping this is going to work.
Okay.
And by the
let's
way,
try.
this is live,
We'll
folks.
give it
We
a
haven't
chance.
we haven't tested this. This is all live in the. Let's see.
And it's just going to tell me to go and click on some buttons.
Yeah. Okay. Tremendous.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it gives you
So-
suggested site layout. Yep. Okay.
I
But
mean,
it's
it's
not
got
gonna-
some good ideas.
It's got some good ideas. You might. Mark
maybe.
suggests. Mark thinks that ChatGPT 5 will have the answers.
Maybe we'll circle back to that and try and see if we have more luck.
Next webinar, Mark, we'll use Anthropic now that that's available here, and we'll see what we can do there as well.
All right, so let's go back to Orchestry, and we'll do that. We'll build this up piece by piece here. So one thing that we find interesting and that's missing out of the box is sometimes you want to classify your workspaces, your sites, your teams using what we would call technically as a text, under a taxonomy, using some kind of tag. So maybe you want to associate every project with a location or an internal division or functional area, or projects that are with a certain customer, project codes. You might be a law firm and you want to associate a project with a legal matter, right? There's lots of really good scenarios for tagging here. The problem is out of the box, this is really difficult to do, and it's really difficult to enforce. So we let customers create any bit of metadata they want, and we support simple fields like choices and text, but we also support, good practices like using the term store for customers that have that in place already. And what you can do then with that is you can create a very powerful request form that is going to request all of these mandatory pieces of information directly in the same flow so that it's very seamless for the end users. And then the administrators and everyone else benefits from the tagging, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is the first piece. One of the things that the metadata enables is really complex naming conventions. So I've yet to encounter a naming convention, I don't know about you, Michael, that we have not been able to handle with our configuration here.
Yes, and we have yet to encounter any customer out of the hundreds that we have who say that the names of their teams and their SharePoint sites are really good. So if someone is on the call here, let us know within the chat. Typically, we have some horrendous names, just horrendous names. People create a team, they call it one. For instance, the best one, I think the best one we've seen, Dave, is people going creating SharePoint sites called OneDrive and then calling up IT, asking for support about their OneDrive site. And the kind of hilarity that ensues from there is really, really bad. So don't do that, because calling your SharePoint site OneDrive is very, very confusing for everyone involved. But universally, people are terrible at naming stuff. They're terrible at naming files, and they're horrific at naming teams and SharePoint sites and Viva Engage communities.
Amazing. So what we can do now is with the naming policy A, you can do smart things like applying a limit, but you can also build very complex naming conventions, and these can be done both for the URL of the site as well as for the name of the group or the site separately. So you can see both of these toggles are kind of independent. So the nice thing about this is you can create maybe a more verbose naming convention for the name of the site, but a shorter version for the URL, because we always want to try to keep those URLs a little bit shorter. Here's an example where we have a template where we're creating legal matters, and we want a prefix on every legal matter to have LM at the beginning and then an underscore. And then we're actually going to capture whatever was provided by the user in the request form in the legal matter and dynamically insert that into the beginning of the name. That way you enforce consistency, right? So now there's no user error possible. The user cannot misspell the legal matter. They have to select it from a controlled list, and then it gets inserted into the name, right? And so now you have a very consistent naming prefix for everything that you create. And you could do this with suffixes or prefixes or a blend of both. If you want to go really crazy, you can do both. And again, you can do that separately with the URL. You can have a very different convention for the URL. We even have counters here. I don't think a ton of people have used these, but even if you have the type of thing that's you're creating several of them over time and you need an incremental counter number added automatically, the naming convention can even do that.
Yeah, the other thing where we do see those counters used and the URL prefix used as well is if you want to kind of hide the name of the SharePoint site, at least. So let's say it's something very, very, kind of private. You can give
Right.
it a name, but then in the URL, you can use a counter or use some other random figure, right? We see that a lot. It's, 74G, some sort of thing there as well. So there's some additional security by obscurity we can use there.
Right, right. So let's save this one and we'll use it in the future. Another thing for good governance, we've got metadata, which gives us that taxonomy. We've got naming policy, which gives us that consistency and findability. Another thing we probably want is a little bit of an approval workflow, and that's also something we can do very easily. And most customers don't need anything too elaborate. Once they've established a good template, it often reduces the complexity and the layers of approvals that are really required because the quality is already there, right? So you can create a multi-step approval, a single-step approval. You can even farm the approval out to Power Automate and do some really, really advanced things if you like. But the beauty of this is that, yeah, you could still have that level of control, of course, on every request. You can also support templates of documents. So this can be really useful if you have like a standard policy template or you have a standard project charter document, for example, right? You want to make sure that everyone's using the same copy and it's always a challenge, right? So what if you could just embed that right into the template and make sure that what they get is that authoritative copy every time, right? We can, of course, add templated channels. We can even add templated features, which, we could spend a whole hour talking about, Michael, but the idea of features is kind of modular additional elements that you want to make available to the end user, and they can choose whether or not their use case needs these things.
Yeah, this is the Orchestry answer to the what to use when question. And I really like it because think of a feature as something that you present to your end users when they're going through that provisioning process, and we'll talk about that. But it's presented in a business context. So if you scroll down here, I think the one we always use, Dave, is the what's called the risk register, right?
Yeah.
Pretty common project. Some of them need a risk register, some of them don't. Typically as an end user, if I go to IT is asking like, do you want a list? Do you want a library? Do you want a page? Do you want like users don't know. They have no idea.
Know.
Well, but with Orchestry, you can create a risk register feature, map it to some piece of functionality in Microsoft 365. Here we've mapped it to a custom list, but maybe Dave, it could be a third-party tool, it could be a page within SharePoint or wherever else that is. Keep that consistency there and let your users go and choose that through the request process. So this capability here in Orchestry we find is really, really powerful. For you more technical folks, we're using the PMP framework on this, which is really neat. So again, you can do anything that you can do in PMP. So it could be customized lists, customized libraries. We've even got features for allowing people to choose which hub they might want to connect to when they provision a site. So lots of power, lots and lots of flexibility there.
Hundreds or thousands of use cases here are possible. And if you've already done some work in here, the nice thing is you can import these directly into features very easily and then add them on, right? And then finally, we stitch this all together with our templates themselves. So I'm just going to open one up, spend a little bit of time walking you through the depth of configuration that it offers. So of course you can define the name of the template. You can give it a really nice description, help users make sure that they're making the right choice. You can even direct them to external resources to help guide their choice or to guide them to a terms of service that you want them to agree to or something like that. You can add imagery, of course. So all of this just makes it kind of supports that kind of ease of use for the end user. But where it gets really powerful is once we start getting into these other tabs. I think my favorite, probably Michael's as well, is the live template feature. So one of the things I spoke about with the kind of the nice thing about PNP is you can go quite deep and you can maintain these very kind of repeatable templates and you can execute them through PowerShell, but they're difficult to maintain. The thing that we instead do here is what we call a live template. So I'll flip over to Teams here and I'll show you an example of a template. So here I have a team called TMPL. I've actually put that prefix so that I know that this is one of my templates. And I'm going to actually go and create the template for what the gold standard is for any of our internally led projects. And for that project, for that template, my needs are 5 channels: general, deliverables, help and support, reports, tasks, and timelines. That's what we've agreed to in our PMO, right? And in each of these channels, you look at the top, I have a preset structure of tabs. I have files, project documents. I have the home page. I have, sorry, I can't seem to get rid of this loop page from the top. I've tried about 10 times. Here's the home page, right? And I have a really nicely configured home page, and I might have several other SharePoint pages. I might have like a custom project status page. These are just SharePoint pages, right? But the fact is that maintaining these is difficult. Here I have a custom list that we alluded to called the risk register, right? So I've got lots of goodies in this template, and I usually don't build this all overnight. I build this over time iteratively into what it becomes. And it's, like I said, it's always evolving, but it's quite deep. You see across all of these channels, across all of these have tabs, and a lot of them even, you can even ship with metadata, documents, formatting, all sorts of good stuff here. Like here's a great view of my project documents. If you look at them, look at this. Everything's like, maybe this is the preset kind of quota of documents that I want every project to start with, and they're already tagged and they've already got the really nice columns and everything's ready to go, right? So the beauty of the live template is that we just allow you to tell us which team or which SharePoint site in your environment should we copy. We don't make you define that in code anymore. We take that out of the equation and we do that ourselves. So we let you create that just in the native experience, which is a lot more accessible. It's now something that doesn't require a developer. And the Orchestry engine can take care of the complexity of decompiling that every single time a request is made and generating that template again every time. So the live template is extremely powerful, and it can support deep things like custom content types, custom columns. If you're long-time users of SharePoint, you're going to be using features like this, and you're going to want to make sure that that stuff is always getting cloned over in the exact same way for that consistency.
And content as well, which is really, really neat. So for a project, you might want to have your project documents already in there, right, Dave? Like
Right,
physical, not physical, but Excel
right.
files and Word files and PowerPoint and all of that sort of stuff. And again, that's one of the limitations that we have at the moment in terms, or one of the limitations that SharePoint has at the moment, even some of the scripting, is you can put the structure in, but putting in content is a little bit more difficult as well.
And then there's, policies, which is a whole different call. We can talk about the beauty of this is that you can automatically integrate governance policies in Orchestry, which is another part of the product, right into the provisioning. So right from the beginning, these workspaces are governed under the right kind of strictures. But if we look at configuration, you can see the depth here. You can configure the application of sensitivity labels, permissions, minimum owners and members, approval workflows and naming policies and metadata, which we already showed you. Also group configuration, SharePoint configuration, and then you can configure which of those PNP features do you want to make available, channels, documents, security, and then really one of the really most exciting ones I like is the ability to just use a pre-built webhook at the end. So for any customers that are doing something that just is even beyond the means of PNP, for example, they can use a custom post-provisioning webhook, and this can fire off a request to Power Automate with everything that we just created in a nice content and nice format. And then you can go and run something like Power Automate to make those last little remaining custom tweaks you want to do. So really, really, really flexible and really powerful in helping to clamp down on common security governance challenges right through the template itself. And what we don't want to give up now is the end user experience. And so what I'll do is I'll flip over to Teams again, but I'll actually now open the Orchestry Teams application. This is also the same experience. It's available as a SharePoint web part. So if you're not using Teams yet, you can still do this very same thing. But kind of the biggest piece that is most used right now in the Orchestry application for end users is the requests tab. And this is where now the users come and they interact with what you as an administrator have made available through the Orchestry provisioning engine, right? So here we're now flipping over to the user. The user now knows that they can't create anything in Teams or SharePoint anymore. That's clamped down. Instead, they come here. This is their guided wizard through what they want to create. And you can customize these. You can also control which users see which templates very easily. So if you say you want to have a regional template and only people in that region should see it, or business unit, or whatever it may be, it's not a one size fits all. You can really tailor who should see what here and make sure that that works for you.
And not just Teams, Dave, but Teams, team sites, communication sites, Viva Engage communities, non-group
Right,
connected team sites, all of that stuff. So the
right,
way that we envisage this is from the end user side, whatever you need, whatever you're trying to do, there's one place where you go to it, right? You don't have to train your users to go to Teams to create Teams and SharePoint to create SharePoint and Viva Engage to create Viva Engage. You can go to that one particular area. And we find this can be extremely useful and extremely powerful. Again, making sure that you're stopping that chaos from the very, very beginning and giving people kind of this really nice guided experience going through this wizard process.
right. And again, you can customize all this. So the naming and the language and all of that can be in your organizational language, right? So that people understand exactly what they should be doing. Let's click. I think the client project is nice because we can look up a customer name in the term store in this one, Michael, or do you think the internal project is
I always use
best?
internal.
Okay, let's do internal.
That's the one that I know and love best.
Know and love. Well, we can't go against that. Okay, so let's go with the internal project. So the first screen we get presented with here is some of these kind of, I think of them as, a la carte. Like you go to a restaurant, you get a menu, and you get to choose, right? And this is usually really well received. You can shut all of this off if you want, but it can be a really nice way to reduce the amount of templates you maintain while adding that flexibility on top, the things that get layered on. So let's have a look at, what are features? What are some of the features I could add? Oh, an acronym dictionary. That sounds useful. I'd like to see that. Let's go and find the risk register that Michael mentioned earlier. That sounds like something I would need. We even have features here that do things like adjusting permissions in SharePoint. So let's do this, for example. We could do that. You can enforce these happen, or you can let them be optional, or a combination of both. So you can use the features to enforce mandatory changes, or you can just let the user choose like I've done. In this case, look, I've got 2 document templates with the lock, meaning they're locked into this template, but the user can still go and add more from the catalog, right? So let's say they want, let's say a project vision template looks interesting. Let's add that. So now I've actually changed what I want very easily right within the same flow of the request.
Yeah, and again, completely non-technical, Dave, right? You don't
Right.
have to know, web parts and lists and libraries and loop pages, none of that stuff, right?
Right.
It's again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible and really empower those end users. And it's really kind of being able to provide that in your own business language. And all of this is configurable here as well, folks. Like this whole page, if you don't want to use this, you just remove it
Yeah.
off our provisioning wizard as well. But it's really nice that you can have and create these things which are very customized to your organization.
Yeah. Now, if we move forward, we're now seeing some of the metadata that's been built into the template. So in this case, for the internal project, we've configured it that we want to capture a location and a division, but that could be completely different for another template. Your other template could be capturing a project code, and then your third template could be capturing a customer name, right? It's completely flexible as you go through. So in this case, we're going to capture a location. Let's say that we're doing this project in Asia, and it's being led by our manufacturing division, right?
No,
So very easy.
do Africa and accounting because that's unless you know the name of these workspaces, but that's the only one
Okay,
that
sure.
I
I
know.
know where you're going with that. All right,
Right.
let's do Africa and accounting here. And let's go next. So I made that pretty easy. The first thing I want to just quickly highlight here is you'll notice this is already applying our prefix from our naming convention. So PRJ is our prefix for projects. AFR is what has been selected as Africa, and you can see I'm not fibbing. If I choose another option, you can see these three letters are changing. And the same for division, right? So we've got project, AFR, accounting, and now we have a consistent way that people can just scan all of the things in their team's environment, and they know immediately that it's a project out of Africa led by accounting. Simple, right? Try doing that manually with humans, not so simple.
Or even try doing that with teams when you got a few hundred teams in that.
Right.
So let's say, David, that we want to work on a pilot project. So let's call it pilot. I think that's a decent name for this, right?
Yeah. Something seems to be happening here. Aha. What's happened here, Michael?
So a couple of things that have happened. Now, I really like this. This is functionality that we built really, really early on. We talk about stopping sprawl and duplication all of the time in Microsoft 365. And as you know, I can go into Teams and I can create 5,000 teams called pilot. It doesn't care, right? Which for us always seemed bizarre, because why would you want to do that? So we handle that a little bit differently within Orchestry. The first thing that you see is on the top, it says a name of this workspace already exists. We're not going to go and create something, or we're not going to allow you to create 500 teams called pilot, because it doesn't make any sense to 99.9% of organizations or anything. So that top red bar is to stop duplication. The build down the bottom is to stop sprawl, right? So for instance, I might actually be a member of a team called pilot somewhere already, right? So we're trying to stop that duplication at the top and sprawl down the bottom. Now, from a security perspective, just so you folks know, on this page in particular, it's only teams that I have access to, right? Which is going to stop. So it's not going to leak teams that you might want to hide, but we hear that all of the time, right? Hey, I'm trying to find the HR team, and I look for HR, and there's like 17 teams called HR, human resources, some sort of weird combination, right, of them. So this really helps you making sure that you create really unique names for your teams, your SharePoint sites, your Viva Engage communities, whatever else. And the metadata option with the naming conventions, you know, we joke about it. It's such a fundamental part, because people are just, like I said, horrific at naming these things. You don't have to train people, right? They don't have to read governance documentations. They just have to use Orchestry. All they got to do is choose the location, choose the division, put in the name, and we'll make sure that the name's correct, the security's correct, the group name's correct, the URL, and all of that is there. So it's pretty neat. So David, we cannot create a team called pilot because one already exists. So let's see something else here. Oh, Marble Run.
My son's been playing with his Marble Run lately, so this is a good one. So it's called Project Marble Run here, and Orchestry is letting me proceed. No duplication, no overlap.
Tremendous. Right. Now location. Let's go North America here, as we are in North America, and division. Which division are we working in here?
Let's go back to manufacturing.
Let's go back to manufacturing. By the way, the location we have to change the Australia one to Australia and New Zealand, because whenever I demo this to Australians and particularly New Zealanders, they get quite upset. They're supposed to be continents, but we'll change that later on. And you can easily within Orchestry as well.
Easily, yeah. It's all in your control. And then you have a very seamless process to add people, and you can't just randomly put anybody's name in. You actually use search and Microsoft search to find the right people. It even suggests people for you here, so you could say, oh, Michael will be my compatriot here and managing the team. And you've noticed that this was previously red and now it's gone green, because I've now satisfied a governance rule that I have to have at least 2 owners, right? You could have 3, 4, 5, you choose that limit, but it's a really good practice, right?
It's a huge practice, right? for people. The problem with ownerless teams and SharePoint sites is brutal for organizations. And it's brutal because if you're trying to do a cleanup for Copilot, for instance, I assume most of you folks are in IT, you can't just start deleting content and deleting sites because you don't own that. But if you've got a whole bunch of ownerless teams and SharePoint sites, what happens is that no one owns that content. And now you're left trying to understand, who owns this? Can we get rid of this? And all of those issues. So having that from the very, very beginning is also super, super useful as well through here. And again, you can do that for owners, you can do that for members, and you've even got the flexibility to make this different across different templates, Dave. So maybe for projects, you want to have at least 2 owners, but for departments, you want to have, I don't know, at least 3 or maybe just 1. Again, all of that is easily configurable there as well.
Right. So to Edward's question, good question. Can you control that the owners have gone through training? The only way you could do it right now is you could make sure that only people that have gone through the training are allowed to make the requests and therefore become owners, Edward. But it wouldn't stop them from adding additional owners that haven't. So there's kind of like a middle ground there. But yeah, it would be something we could add.
Actually, that's not a bad idea. Actually, yeah. I mean, what you could do, Edward, like Dave said, you would have this template available to a group, and that group is owners that have passed whatever training that you essentially want. So there is a way. So it wouldn't be on this screen. It would be more on that on
the
that template screen.
Yeah. Right.
So not perfect, but hopefully it'll do the job.
Yeah. And then there's also an approval. But yeah, I think that the best solution is, like allow only owners from a certain security group, for example, to be added to this. And then we could just filter the search here, right? That it only returns people from that group. So there's definitely something we could do. I think it would be, it's not a bad idea at all. Now we get a final confirmation here. We check that everything's good. If we made a mistake, we don't like something, we can edit it, we can go back, but let's assume we're happy with it. We're running short on time here, so we want to move forward. Click that we're done. And once we click that, this is going to go immediately into the queue. And it's going to first go and secure an approval here because I believe we have an approval workflow set on this template. And we'll see that that'll immediately get forwarded as a task for approval. So let's go flip over here and go, and we can even see what this looks like. So now as the user, I can actually see that Marble Run is in the queue, and I can see that right now it's waiting on an approval. I can even go and see a little bit more about what's happening. And right now so it's waiting.
Just a correction, Dave, as an admin, you just said as a user. So this is an admin thing as well. So Dave is part of the approving group. Again, you can have this. So as an admin, Dave can actually go in and see this and approve this going forward here.
Yeah, but I can also go and see my requests in the My Request view. So it does give you that kind of visibility on what's happening, right?
Yeah.
What's happening to my request. Now, if I flip over to another user, I'll just keep the same user for simplicity for now. I'll also go and approve it. I've actually received a task. Let's see if Archie is one that's not, if not, I'll flip over. We should get a task. Here it is. So we've received a task. We also get an email for this, right? If we want both, that's totally fine. We get a Teams notification, an email, and you also get this consolidated task view in Orchestry that shows you all your open tasks, right? So here I have, look, provisioning request, my approval is required, and it's for a project called Marble Run. So let's go have a look at it. I'm the approver here. I can take a look at it and approve it. I can even make some quick changes to this. Like, for example, if I know that Marble Run is not actually the formal name of this, for example, I can go and I can make some edits, right? Let's say it's actually called Marble Race. So let's tweak that. And we don't have to reject it and make the person restart, which is always a pain. We fixed this. The naming convention has been fixed. And let's tweak the description. And let's see if there's anything else we want to change. Oh, let's add one more owner. I think they should also have, who's another person we have in this environment?
Do you have Lee?
Alex?
Alex, yeah, I think Alex.
Yeah, Alex. So let's say Alex really should be an owner as well. The requester just missed that. And so now I've actually made some changes to the request on the fly here without sending it back. And then I can approve it. In this case, I can even do a full override, which will bypass the actual fact that there's 2 approval steps here that are required. So let's just do that because I want to show you the progress bar, which is always one of my favorite parts. As the administrator, you can actually watch in real time what Orchestry is doing, and it is going and it is retrieving everything from that live template that we showed you here in Teams. Everything down to the document level is going to be extracted, and then it's going to be applied to my new Marble Run, Marble Race project that I've just requested.
Awesome. Okay. 1 minute left. Perfect.
1 minute. Wow, we went through time very quickly here. So
very, very quickly. Awesome. Well, hopefully, folks, that gives you a little bit of time here as well. Hang on, there's a bunch of questions here. John, we'll get back to you for sure. Trying to make any teams from around okay, yeah. We'll get back to you, John. Same with Simon as well here. We'll get back to you, folks, with those questions. You guys must be Orchestry customers, so we'll get on that. Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Thank you, everyone, for today's session. Hopefully it was useful. Again, quite a bit of Orchestry this time, a little bit of out-of-the-box stuff. We hope that you found it all useful. Thank you so much for the engagement. We do have another webinar coming up in 3 weeks, I think, about permissions, part 3, because part 1 and 2 were so popular. Now we have to do a part 3. So we've got another one here as well. Feel free to reach out to us. For some of you folks as well who are ShareGate customers, ShareGate has deprecated those provisioning features. If you speak to ShareGate, they're going to tell us to speak to. They're going to tell you to speak to us anyway. We would love to help you if you're having issues within provisioning. So feel free to reach out to us as well. But thank you, everyone. Appreciate the time. Dave, a round of applause for your amazing ChatGPT art, and you will get the recording. And if you want the slides complete with David's AI art, let us know. We'll send them over to you as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.